Welcome back to the Alec Lewis Show. I'm your host, Alec Lewis. This is episode 162, recording on Tuesday, April 28th, a couple days after the draft. If you missed it, stories galore at The Athletic to document what happened over the course of those 3 days. On Monday, talk through the UDFAs. On Tuesday, a little story about the GM search with some names in there. On this show today, we are going to have a guest for you. His name is Dane Brugler, and he is, for my money, the preeminent draft expert within the space. He each year puts out a document called The Beast. It is like 300,000 words, and it is as in-depth as anything you're going to find, probably from anything that you'd find within an NFL scouting department. So Dane, all of the guys the Vikings took, Dane will have insights on from team folks, from college coaches, from everybody involved. And so I think, first of all, I'm really grateful that he took the time, 30 minutes, to talk with us through a lot of these picks. But I also think you guys will really, really enjoy this. Those of you who want to know as much as possible about this draft and who the Vikings acquired. If you're new here and watching on YouTube, please hit the subscribe button. It helps us out a ton. And if you're listening on Apple, Spotify, or iHeart, you can follow us, rate, review, all of that good stuff. This show, which we do 2 times a week, every single week, is presented by First Resource Bank. That is a member FDIC bank in the Minneapolis area, run by really good people. Tim Siegley, Aaron Siegley, Charlie Anderson. These guys are from the Midwest. They care about this community. They're huge Vikings fans with season tickets, and they have an online banking platform that, for me, since I moved up here, has been the best that I've found to use, and I rely on it for my banking needs on a daily basis. So their information is in the description below. Show is also sponsored by Pro MN Athletics. If you have kids who love football, who play football, who are getting, 7th grade, 8th grade, looking at high school, have visions, of playing at a high level, are getting close to, high school workouts, all of that stuff, I'd really recommend Pro MN, because it is a infrastructure for youth development and football in Minnesota, run by guys who really just want to lift the tide of it. 3 guys, Graham, Kurt, and Tanner. Tanner being Tanner Morgan, former Minnesota Gophers quarterback. They have structured academies, 7-on-7 leagues throughout the summer. And Tanner, who played in Minnesota, again, has worked with a lot of his former teammates at other positions. So not just quarterback, but a bunch of other positions. And they've helped kids, walk them through the recruiting process, camps, and all that stuff. So please pass their information along. Their information is in the description below. Let's not waste any more time. Here is the conversation with Dane Brugler, who is the Athletics draft expert and the author of The Beast. All right, Dane, welcome back to the Alec Lewis Show. Have you recovered at all? Is the right question to start, I think.
That's what the month of May is for, is rest and recovery before jumping right back in for next year. But no, this is the week after is always a good chance to, just put a bow on the draft class. And because we talked for months and months and months about guesswork, about, hey, what could fit? What could this look like? And so it is refreshing to actually talk about, oh, so this is actually what happened. This is how it could fit. This is how we think this could work out. And so that is very much a nice change of pace compared to the last few months.
What is, in the draft ether, I'd say over the last few days, there has been a relentless conversation about like consensus big board and where guys fall publicly versus privately. Do you have any thoughts on it? If you do, I wonder what you think about like how, that conversation has proliferated the space. It feels like, and I've talked to some of the Vikings people about it, it feels like in many ways, and I thought this was a great example. One of the Vikings folks said to me, it's kind of like the Jimmy Johnson chart in some way, where you all have your own value, but you can kind of assess what public value can be. I thought that was interesting, but I wonder what you've thought about that conversation, because in some ways it does apply to the picks we're going to talk about here that the Vikings made.
Yeah, and I think that there are. I mean, anybody with social media and the way the internet is now, anybody can post rankings, right? And anybody can post, their feelings on players, and that's great. But I think that sometimes it could be misleading based off of how some people feel about some players. I mean, I know one team that creates their own consensus board based off of like 4 different people in the media who do
Hmm.
this just to get a sense for. So like I know they take myself, they take Daniel Jeremiah and like 2 others and put them together and create their own consensus board, and they use that as a measuring stick for, hey, this is kind of how the outside world sees these guys. And it's obviously it's not going to change how they feel. It's not going to change their grade at all. It's just their way of getting a sense for how other teams might, or just the general consensus might feel. But at the end of the day, it's a data point. It's nothing more than just that. It's not something that's going to necessarily influence what they do on draft night.
And I think we probably talked about this in the past. It's been fun for me over the last 4 years to learn about this space, but also to hear the amount of data points that exist, whether it is, personal, psychological, processing. I mean, there's just so many layers of the evaluation, which is why, I mean, obviously it's why I appreciate what you do, because you try to get as deep as you possibly can, which I think, on the outside, I can watch one game film of a certain player, but that is the most minuscule data point possible in terms of what these guys actually are and can be. All right, let's get
Well,
to, or
I'll give
unless,
you.
yeah.
I'll give you a quick example because, like, I know because we do our own consensus board. Austin Mock does a great job at the Athletic, compiling some of those. And I remember a couple years ago, looking at our consensus board, and Brandon Joseph, a safety at a Notre Dame, was like in the 50s or something like that. And
Hmm.
the reason he was so much lower than most is because I didn't think he was a top 100 pick. I had him in the late rounds, and I'm just like, I think we're really missing the boat here because there are some people out there in the media that really liked him, but in reality, the consensus or how the NFL felt about this player was nowhere near that. And so I think it can be misleading for a player, and he ended up going undrafted, but I think it can be misleading for a player like that, where just some in the media are way off compared to how the NFL are feeling. But I think for the most part, it's something that is like we said, it's a data point, and I don't think it should be viewed any more than just that.
Totally makes sense. All right, we'll segue to the Vikings 9 picks, which were interesting for me. I think they were interesting for people throughout the league. And I'll just rip through one by one because you will have the perspective of all these guys. It's part of the reason I wanted to have you on. At number 18, when the Vikings took Caleb Banks, the defensive tackle from Florida, what was your? I mean, I think you could probably go find the initial reaction on the Athletic Football Show. But I guess as you've thought about it more, how have you thought about that pick in particular?
Oh, it was the biggest whoa moment of the first round for me. Like Ty Simpson was a little bit of a surprise going 13 to the Rams, but it's something we had talked about as a maybe not a likely possibility, but a realistic possibility. Banks, I remember I was going over a couple of days before the draft. I was going over some of the wild cards of the first round with a scout. We talked about Caden Proctor. We talked about a couple of these guys, just the different ranges that they could be drafted. And we got to Caleb Banks, and I asked him, what do you think the range is for Caleb Banks? And like for Caden Proctor, it was like, okay, 10 to 25, 15 picks. We'll go somewhere in there. For Caleb Banks, the range he gave me was 15 to 100. Like, just meaning the range of possibilities was all over the place. And it's less about the talent and more about what is the realistic outcomes where he becomes the fully realized version of Caleb Banks. If you grade to the flashes, you can see that. You see that ability, and especially in a draft like this where it's a little weak at defensive tackle and there's just not many Caleb Bankses out there. And so if you wanted one like this, you better go get one, maybe earlier than you would think. And so, going back to February, going into the combine, Banks was my, I think, 22nd overall player in my top
Hmm.
100. So, based off of where we were in February, like 18, that's not a big jump. But then he goes to the combine, breaks the same foot in a different place. And it's just like, okay, it's just something else. It's kind of like the same thing with Jordan Tyson, the receiver from Arizona State. He was a top 12 player for me all year. But then, okay, can't work out of the combine, can't work out at the pro day. And it's like, all right, well, I have to knock him a little bit.
Sure.
It's that's the toughest part for those of us on the outside doing this is the medicals and the character. Like we get that information, but how to reflect it in any type of rankings is tough. And so with Banks, having that another foot injury, I know I knocked him to like 52 or something like that in mine, kind of like a full round type of knock, but it was anything was possible with him because the talent is so great. You just don't find guys that size, 330 pounds at 6'5" and 11-inch hands, 35-inch arms. You don't see guys like that just walk in the earth and be able to
Hmm.
move like that and play like that. And I really enjoyed talking with Kayla. I did a story on him going into the combine,
Yeah.
just how and I just really enjoyed talking to him throughout the process. So I was very happy for him, albeit a little surprised he went as early as he did.
Yeah, there's a lot interesting that you said there. I think one of them was, the medical and the character, and probably I'd say like that can be some of the most valuable stuff because everyone can watch the tape. So it does feel like, that dynamic can really be can really sway, I think, how some of these guys are perceived, and probably in your position it does make it really difficult in terms of trying to slot these guys. I think the point you made about the range in talking with the scout being from 15 to 100, like I think that's here locally, and you've probably seen a lot of this. Some of the critique or a lot of the aftermath analysis has been, could they have traded back, created another middle round pick, and then tried to select him in the 20s? And I think from the Vikings perspective, given the uncertainty on the range, they just weren't comfortable trying to move back with the risk that another team might take that big swing. And I guess I would get your thoughts on that. Like how likely do you think it would have been that another team, potentially like even the Chiefs that end up picking a defensive lineman, would have been
Mm-hmm.
willing to try to snag him maybe in that 20s range? I think that's been the biggest back and forth here locally on the pick.
Well, I think it speaks to how much they really wanted the player, right? And I think that's. I was about to say that's something that every GM contemplates, but obviously the Vikings are in a unique situation with their current front office and the final say about those types of decisions. So maybe it would have looked different if a GM was in place, knowing that, hey, we're going to draft who our coaches want, but it's my job to get the most value out of each pick. And so maybe that's where the Vikings were at a little bit of a disadvantage in this draft with the current setup. But I think it's like I said, it speaks to how much they wanted the player and how much they were not willing to take that risk. Because what's their plan B at the position? If you don't get Caleb Banks, I don't think it's as simple as saying, okay, well, we'll just get Peter Woods then, or we'll just get whoever the next defensive tackle is on our board. Like it was such a thin group, especially of those types, meaning the freaky, you see the high end talent can be a Pro Bowler if everything goes right. They're just those guys they weren't there in this draft, and so you're shooting for the moon a little bit with Caleb Banks. But I'm high risk, high reward. It was a very interesting pick, and like I said, I've really enjoyed talking to Caleb throughout the process, and so I was very happy for him.
Yeah, and I think your point there is exactly right. It's like if you don't swing for him at 18 and they really needed defensive tackle depth, depth. You can't just rely on Dominique Orange, who we'll get to in a second, to be the guy who could potentially get upfield. Now, I mean, to your point, also, I mean, Caleb Banks has to stay healthy. All right, on day two, they took Jake Golday via trade back at 51, Dominique Orange at 82, Caleb Tiernan at 97, and then the Miami safety Jacoby Thomas at 98. Of those four, I guess, who of them stands out to you, and what do you think of that four as a collective?
I mean, it's got to be Jake Golday. I'm just so intrigued, not only by the player but the fit and how exactly Brian Flores clearly has a plan for how he wants to use him. And Golday, I think most fans know, former defensive end at Central Arkansas, like has this versatile experience where he can, get upfield, but he can also drop and cover in space. And he got better and better this year as playing that off-ball linebacker spot. He played kind of like a Sam, so at Cincinnati. So he did cover a lot of ground. He played near the line of scrimmage, but he would go in reverse. He would make plays at the opposite sideline. And so you see the range and you see the instincts and the awareness really improve as the season went on. So I'm just very fascinated with Golday just to see the exact role they want to use him, and then just how that plays out. How quickly does he adapt to NFL speed? I think that's just kind of the question. Is okay. It felt like he finally got there this past year for Cincinnati. Now he has to do it at the NFL level, and so how is it going to play out? So that was really interesting. Big Orange or Big Citrus with Dominique Orange, like there's just not a lot of guys with that in terms of how wide he is, how the anchor that he plays with, how strong he is. He's a block eater, and he can eat up doubles. He can create those 12-car pileups right in the middle of the line of scrimmage. And so there were some teams had some character concerns just from the interview process and had
Sure.
some worries there. And that's why I think he went where he went, and maybe was a little bit because he went like 82. So he fell a little bit further than I think a lot of people
Yeah.
thought he might. But it feels it's a different situation than Caleb Banks, but it feels like, yes, it's a little bit of a risk, but man, if this works out, we just totally revamped our defensive tackle depth chart with what it looks like and where we could get it to. And now it's up to our coaches to make it happen.
Did you watch? I mean, I know you did watch. This is about to be an extremely ridiculous question. I'm about to ask Dane Brugler if he watched the guy, but Jacoby Thomas, the Miami safety, is a really interesting player to me. Where I think he was at Middle Tennessee, then he transfers to Tennessee. He didn't start for Tennessee, and then Miami and Corey Heatherman, the defensive coordinator there, they pluck him to Miami, needing to transform their entire secondary year over year. And he contributes in doing that alongside Keontae Scott, another draftee. And the film is, I mean, like I think someone used the term like he is a crash out. Like I think that was the descriptor that I got from somebody in terms of how he plays. But it feels like, I mean, crazy blitzer, some ball skills on the back end. I think a couple people have like, thrown out Hufanga as kind of like a silly-ish type comp, but like for and that's probably pretty lofty if he can reach that. But I would wonder what you would think about his fit within this very odd, versatile, different scheme.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything you said. Very aggressive, 6'1", 211 pounds. And I think you're right to bring up kind of his path and he actually went to college at Middle Tennessee State as an offensive player. Like he wanted to be on the offensive side of the ball, and then he moves to defense full time. And I think you saw his defensive knowledge grow each year. Like you said, he didn't start at Tennessee. He was more of a sub player. And then he goes, but it's very similar to Keontae Scott, who barely started at Auburn the year before.
Sure.
Both these guys, they transfer to Miami, and credit to Heatherman and that 4-2-5 kind of nickel scheme that they run. he really understood how to get the most out of both these guys. And I mean, he was, I would say, barely draftable during like entering the season, and he forced NFL scouts to kind of rethink that, and so he changed the narrative. And the ball production stands out. 5 interceptions, his ability to bait and drive on throws, that trigger that he plays with. You mentioned it, just the aggressive nature downhill. So yeah, I think that in everything I just said fits what Brian Flores wants in a safety, and kind of the back end guys that are really aggressive coming downhill, can flood zones, can really force the quarterback to think just an extra half beat before he delivers that ball, just because of he knows who's out there. And I think Jacoby Thomas has a chance to be that guy. So yeah, I think, and he's another guy that I really enjoyed talking to.
Yeah.
Like, he is really buttoned up. He's really, I mean, like when he says he loves football, like you believe it, just talking to him. Like he has a really good feel for, all right, this is what I'm going to do the next 15 years of my life, and I'm going to give it everything I have. And so I think a lot of those things probably spoke to Brian Flores and that staff.
Yeah, and I think that is a theme among a lot of these guys, specifically when we get to the day 3 guys, whether it's Max Bredesen, whether it's Chuck Dimmings, we talked to for 20 minutes. And I'm like, I've had friends who watched it and they're trying to find a Chuck Dimmings jersey. Like, I don't know. I can't help you with that already. But yeah, like it felt like, I don't know. And Jay Golday is a similar way. Gavin Gerhardt, the center, who was not on my radar at all. Like, he is another guy who I've already talked to some people who spent time around him at Cincinnati who just rave about, I think the term they've used is servant leader. And so you're asking for examples, but
Mm.
like a lot of these guys, it feels like, are very much potential culture changers. And I'd say for the Vikings folks watching and listening to this is a roster that probably needed to transform in some ways. And if you're doing that with guys who can be anchors internally, then you're in a good spot. They obviously have to work out as players. Max Bredesen, I'd say at in the 5th round, was not on my radar at all, but they added former Miami OC Frank Smith as the assistant head coach. He used Alec Ingold a lot with the Miami Dolphins and Mike McDaniel. So the fact that they can plug a fullback in, to me, makes a lot of sense. I don't know how much work you did on him, but some of the tape, I watched like a Michigan State game he played in 2025, and he was just burying people into the ground as a run blocker. So what is your thought there, I would ask?
Yeah, no, I did watch several games from the last 2 seasons with Bredesen, and he wasn't a big part of the offense in terms of handling the football. Like this past year as a senior, he had, I think, 3 targets, and one was a drop, and 2 were catches. Like 2 catches for 11 yards. He didn't have a single carry in 5 years at Michigan. But obviously, he's his older brothers, kind of were high level football players or high level athletes, I should say, and his older brothers in the league, and I think he definitely benefits from that younger brother theory. If you grow up with older brothers, multiple older brothers, you're going to be tougher. It's science. It's how it is, and I think Max definitely. He benefits from that because he watched his 2 older brothers play sports at a high level. He's always trying to live up to that. He was always he wanted to play with them. So he's always playing with older kids. And, that's something that played over in college where, he hurt his foot. And so he missed the final 2 games of the year. But like he was begging the coaching staff to play, and they almost did, but they kind of opted against it just to save him from himself. But that's just kind of how he's built. And so there, we talked about the fullback position, how it's kind of a dying breed, but and that's why I wasn't sure if Bredesen would even get drafted, just because there's only so many teams that would consider a player that's not a proven pass catcher, not a proven back with the ball in his hands, but he's going to run through a wall for you, be a special teamer, and help out as a blocker. And obviously, there's only so many roster spots in the NFL looking for someone like that. So I guess I was a little surprised that he was drafted as early as the 5th. But again, if you're the Vikings and you have a vision for what that could look like, he was one of the few in this draft that could fit that mold. And so go and get him. And I'm glad you mentioned Demings too, because he is a joy, and maybe this is a theme of this draft, but he was a joy to talk to at the Senior Bowl and then at the Combine. It was almost frustrating at times because it's like, all right, I have another question to ask, but you're still finishing
He's still
your
going.
last answer. Like
Yeah.
he's got a lot to say, and good for him, man. Like he is very thoughtful with his answers. He definitely has a few Bible verses that he focuses on, that he
No
goes
doubt.
back to, and we'll talk about. And I one thing I liked about him at the Senior Bowl was, so I'm on the sidelines in Mobile after maybe Thursday's practice, and they're finishing up practice, and so like I go on the field because I want to talk with a few of these guys, and he's at the middle of the huddle getting everyone together, and he's the voice. Like, he's just met all these guys a couple days ago. This FCS player is the voice at the middle of the huddle, getting everyone pumped up and just telling all these guys, "Hey, we're doing a great job. We're impressing these teams. We're doing it." Like, it was really impressive to listen to. And I mean, that went on for a good 30, 45 seconds. And I mean, he's just an impressive guy. And then you watch the film and you're like, okay, he's got size, he's got speed. Like, yeah, this is the perfect fifth round corner to roll the dice on and say, if we can develop this and maybe have something, whether that's a depth player, and then maybe even more than that.
What do you think? I mean, like, watching his tape, what did you think of him just as a player?
I obviously FCS tape. You look at the receivers, you look up, who he's going up against, and you have to kind of play that in your mind. Like, okay, what
Yeah.
would this look like against an SEC receiver? Because he had some offers to move up, to transfer up. He decided to stay loyal to the coaches that developed him and recruited him. But I think that he, first of all, the physical traits stand out. Like I said, height, weight, speed. I think that's kind of check those boxes for what the NFL is looking for. He's not afraid to get physical. I mean, he will look to challenge receivers early, get them off their route, disrupt that chemistry and timing with the quarterback. So you like to see the physicality and the aggressiveness. And then I think he's something that I care about immensely when it comes to playing cornerback position is balance. Being able to flip your hips and stay balanced within all these different transitions that you have to be able to make, just defending and different route runners. It's not as simple as just turn and run vertically. Sometimes it is on go routes, but sometimes you have to make multiple transitions where you're sinking, staying balanced, and just being an athlete. And I think that's where he gave me a lot of optimism about how that's going to translate to the league.
Yeah, and it was interesting, and it probably speaks to a lot of what we've talked about. But like, it sounded like Gerald Alexander, who Brian Flores hired to be the DB's coach here after Durante Jones left, was down there at Stephen F. Austin, part of the pro day workout, and he was at a lot of these, I think, workouts, kind of one-on-one in that setting to identify that stuff up close. Which again, it speaks to the level of coaching influence on this specific draft. But it also, I think, speaks to the probably specificity in terms of what they wanted and what they look for. And when I was thinking about this last night, and I put this on Twitter, but like Brian Flores got extended, Kevin O'Connell got extended 2 years ago. These guys, I mean, Brian Flores could always get a head coaching job, but he was passed up obviously this past year. So in the event they are here for the next few years, the initial vision of these guys and these draftees will probably be able to play out with these specific systems. And I think that's kind of an interesting layer to what they've done. The last guy we'll talk about, who is one of the most interesting on the list to me, was at 198, they drafted Damon Claiborne, the running back from Wake Forest. And the film is, I mean, there are runs with Damon Claiborne at Wake Forest from 2025, where I mean I'm sitting there laughing, or I'm like grabbing my phone to clip it because some of them are absolutely ridiculous in terms of his lateral movement and burst. But I talked to people around it. There was obviously a lot with this guy, and probably the reason he got to the six. I would just ask, what do you think of that pick? What do you think of that player? What do you think is possible there with him?
Yeah, he's fun. He's exciting. Now, obviously, he's under 190 pounds, and so it's great that he's a 4.3 athlete, but he's a little undersized compared to what you ideally look for at that position. And so between the tackles, maybe he's a little more limited than ideally what you want. But if you get him a lane, he can take it the distance, and he's just a ball of energy, and it's fun to watch. There's no doubt about it. There were some, he was banged up a little bit. That played a part in why he fell. There was some stuff earlier in his career, and I was told just maturity things, and I was told he matured as the years went on. And I don't think he's a fully matured human yet. Like, I mean, I wasn't at that age, so I think he's on the right path, and I think you have to be. I feel some level of optimism that he's trending in the right direction. But as an athlete, man, he goes 0 to 60 in a blink. And it's fun to see him stack cuts on cuts on cuts because he's so dynamic and can really make defenders look foolish with the way he moves. And so, yeah, I'm interested to see how exactly they use him, get him involved in the screen game, get him some of those sub down carries where even on a draw where maybe he's got a little room to work and can really string those moves together and make something out of nothing. So yeah, I'm a big fan of Claiborne and just what he offers on the field. It's just hopefully he's able to stay on the field.
Yeah, and I think a couple of days before the Beast dropped, I was talking to somebody, and they mentioned Achane and again the Frank Smith connection and all that. And then I think in the Beast you had you mentioned Achane in your little blurb of Damon Claiborne. I was like, all right, Dane's on it with that. So it's
yeah, a
that
diet version, but
yeah.
I
Right. I know it's not a direct comparison. We'll round it out. I mean, I think you did grades on every team, and you could probably talk through what you think of the grading process in general. I know people like reading them. It's obviously probably gonna, it takes time to evaluate these guys. I think you had the Vikings at 29. Just you can walk through the explanation in terms of why you felt that way, and I'll just leave it to you of how do you think about this class as a whole as we've talked through it and you've thought about it over the last few days.
I mean, if I'm being honest, like there wasn't a draft class 1 through 32 that I just despised, or I totally disliked what they did. But when you do something 1 through 32,
yeah,
somebody's got to be in the 20s, somebody's got to be in the 30s. So it is what it is. But the Caleb Banks pick is risky, man, and I don't think they had to do it at 18. Now, again, I won't say it was a bad pick because it might. I think it absolutely could work out and end up being something that we look back on and say, man, that changed maybe the direction of that position for this team. But it's awfully risky. So not a bad pick, but a risky pick. And so I think it's something that that was really the main reason why they were lower than maybe some others. But I think overall, I mean, we just ran through it. There were some risky picks in this draft, but guys that if they hit, then I mean, we're gonna look back at this class as saying this is maybe the a group that helped this team take another step. Maybe not. This isn't a group that I think is gonna get them over the top, but it's a group that I think can help them take that next step as they try to not just make the playoffs, but compete for the ultimate prize. And so there are a couple guys in this draft, this class that can help them do that.
You said at the top that you'll take a quick break, but then hop right in it for 27. Where do you even start I mean, you're looking at these hundreds of guys. Like I wouldn't even know how you start your process. So I'll just ask you not to make you think about it because you shouldn't deserve to.
Well, it's just about building the database, and that's it. A good chunk of it's already built. Just
Sure.
because I scouted these guys that are going back to school instead of we thought they might be in this class. Just watching college football all last year, inevitably you see guys that are not yet eligible, but you're going to write them down and you're going to make sure they're in there. And then I get certain lists from teams that I'm able to put those names, make sure those names and cross reference, make sure that I'm not missing anybody. And the summer is really the biggest or the most important time for me because that's where you get the foundation of who these
Yeah.
guys are. And so not only building the database, but then watching film on all these guys just to because you want to go into the season, the college football season, with a frame of reference. That way,
Sure.
okay, either this guy did get better or he didn't, or maybe he just plateaued. Like maybe this just is who he is. So getting a frame of reference on the top 1,000 seniors, something like that, and then like a lot of underclassmen, like that is the bulk of what my summer is, and it helps me as I go into the season really have a good feeling for what the draft class looks like.
It's unbelievable. The work you do is very impressive. I think Robert Mays, somebody said this on our staff, like your standard motivates, and I think it's something that we all kind of appreciate and strive to reach. So I'd say it's been awesome to follow it. It's been awesome to hear when I'm talking to Vikings people and they reference that what they saw in the bees. It's always pretty validating. So first of all, thanks for hopping on. Hell of a job this cycle, and I'll look forward to the work to come because for some reason it doesn't stop, and that's part of it. But thanks for hopping on, Dan. Really appreciate it. And the people listening and watching, they will find your work because if you care about this league, you probably should. So thanks, Dan. Appreciate it, man.
Yeah, you're too kind with what you said. I appreciate that, and so I really enjoy the talk, and I'm sure we'll be talking about these guys as we get to training camp and into the season. So no, I appreciate it, Alec.
That will do it for episode 162 of the Alec Lewis Show. Appreciate Dane hopping on. I imagine you guys will love his analysis. It's clear headed, it's informed, and it's always insightful. So, really fun to talk to Dane. We typically try to do it pre or post draft every single year. And for him to take 30 minutes out of his time, days after spending all of his waking hours on this specific event. Cannot thank him enough. Really appreciate that. Like we said at the top, stories at The Athletic are nonstop. I had, every draft pick specifically covered. UDFA thoughts on Monday, GM story on Tuesday. On Thursday, I'm going to come back and hit the draft, talk to a lot of people, college coaches, scouts, people throughout the league on these 9 players who the Vikings drafted to be able to bring you guys kind of a confidential on the guys of the Vikings pick. So I think you guys will enjoy that. It's full of inside stories, perspective. And then we'll keep it rolling into next week with more stories. It does not slow down. Schedule release is coming up. Mandatory mini camps, voluntary workouts will be at all of them as we always are. And you can stay tuned to the Alec Lewis Show and the Athletic for comprehensive coverage on all that. If you're new on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. If you're listening on audio, you can rate, review, and follow us at those spots. This show is presented by First Resource Bank, sponsored by ProMN. Also, should mention Unreal, the clothing brand here in the Twin Cities area that has gone national. I was in Florida and saw people repping it down there, but they've supported the show going back to the fall and have a lot of exclusive drops for the Wild and the Wolves throughout these playoffs and much more to come throughout this summer and into the fall. So thank you guys for listening to episode 162 of the Alec Lewis Show, and we will talk to you very, very soon.